Princess Peach is so dainty and feminine all the time, even when she's slicing and dicing. What would she look like in heavy armor? We're talking full plate mail. Let's try and design her a suit of armor ourselves. Even though this is a pretty simple fan design, every character design begins the same way, by doing research. For the most part, looking for images off Google or Pinterest is usually sufficient. But books are also an amazing resource if you need to find some historically accurate outfits. For now, we can just grab a reference image of Princess Peach and some pictures of historically accurate armor. I also really like using live-action roleplay armor as a reference. They tend to have a more fantastical flair, but since they're actually intended to be worn, they have a sense of realism and practicality to them that I really like. Some of the images on my mood board had this really awesome chunky look that I wanted for my version of Armored Peach. I also drew this thumbnail a while back, and I thought this silhouette was a lot of fun. Princess Peach seems like the perfect place to apply it. I started by doing thumbnails or rough sketches to get a general idea of how I wanted my character design to look like. After I drew one that felt like it could be a decent design, I started sketching. But as you can see, I was really struggling with the sketch. You know how you have days where you just draw and nothing comes out right? I guess this was just one of those days for me, but the only thing to do is to keep at it. It took me a while, but eventually I was able to get a sketch that I was satisfied with. One thing I knew I wanted to give her was huge fantasy pauldrons. It's a pretty common trope in fantasy armor, and for good reason. Having huge pauldrons makes a character look super tanky and defensive. You see a lot of it in old Warcraft designs or in Fire Emblem. But since my pauldrons were so ludicrously huge, I was having a difficult time fitting them onto the armor while still leaving space for, well, everything else. But then I discovered these things. These things are called blade breakers or sword breakers or something. They are definitely not historically accurate, but they're popular in live-action roleplay armor, and for good reason. They give your pauldrons a real flair and intimidating aura. And perching those on top of the pauldrons gave the armor the silhouette that I wanted. But the pauldrons are still looking a little plain, so I tried to give her some spikes on it, kind of like a crown. You can see I already had this idea in the initial thumbnail, but they were looking kinda too aggressive for Princess Peach. So in the end, I softened them down into a flower petal motif to match her original puffed sleeves a little more. When I'm done with the rough sketch, I like to start putting down some basic values while I design. It gives me a better idea of what the final design will look like, more than just lines. In particular, I can check for readability and make sure that the shapes are well distributed and appealing. But while I'm doing this, I notice that the tassets are looking a little too pointy compared to the rest of the design. They don't really match with the rounded shape language I'm using for the rest of the outfit. In Princess Peach's original design, the only pointy elements are on her crown, so I'd like to keep it that way. So I actually make the middle section even pointier, but I give it more of a crown motif and round out the tassets on the side. So here's the final sketch. All I need to do now is draw the line art and add color. While I was working on adding shading to my values, I showed up. Some of you might recognize her from my older videos, but she's requested to be kept anonymous going forward, and I will, of course, respect that. She told me that while doing a values draft, I should do my best to restrict myself to 3 values maximum, that I should crunch down similar values to the same values. And to be honest, I was kind of confused by this. I didn't quite understand why I should be doing this, so I just continued doing the exact opposite of what she recommended and kept adding more and more values. It wasn't until much later on in the drawing that I realized, I think it's finally gotten through my thick skull. I'm not actually trying to render everything at this stage. The main purpose is to check for readability. By restricting yourself to a few values, you can easily adjust them while you're working on it. After I completed the basic values, it's time to add color. I just created a color layer and started painting color on top of my values. This might be surprising to some people because often they tell me that their colors look washed out or muddy when they use this technique. Like this. Doesn't look so good, right? If this is your problem, I think the most important key to remember is make sure your shadows are a different color. You know how shadows don't look so good when you just use a low opacity black on a multiply layer? The same applies here. You want to change the color of your shadows, so make sure you're doing that when you're working with a color layer. In this case, I just make sure to make the shadow colors a little bit cooler. because oftentimes shadows tend towards blue because of the reflected light from the sky, even if in this case she's just standing in a white void. If you want to know more about this stuff, I have a few videos on my channel about shading and color. Check them out if you have the time. So while I'm continuing to color, Joofoot suddenly rolls in to tell me that I need to fix my perspective and form drawing on this crown weapon over here. Oh wait, I can see it myself. I mean, it's not that bad, right? If I just ignore the problem, maybe it'll just go away and I don't have to worry about it. It's not perfect, but... Sending on Discord? Yay! Thank you! Fine! I'll just draw this then. Apparently, this adjustment only took him 2 minutes and it's so much better. Just goes to show how much I have to learn. And in fact, since he handed me a perfect solution, why not just use it? So I just traced it, and now it looks so much better. Thanks, Joofoot! So shortly afterwards, it was brought to my attention that it wasn't only the weapon that had an issue. The shield is bugging you? Wait. And around the same time, someone also made this amazing suggestion. A toad needs to be strapped on the... Oh, you're right! I do need to put a toad right over here, don't I? It's something Peach has done before anyway, right? Okay, you know what? I'm not gonna make the same mistake as last time, because just look at all these shields that SteveSketches drew for me. They're so awesome. Like before, if someone is just gonna give me the answers, I'll go ahead and use it. So I traced the shield as well. I did make some minor changes here and there though. I changed the wings at the bottom to a crown motif to match the rest of the armor, and the chains felt a little bit too gritty for Princess Peach, so I turned them into a cute little ribbon. I also calmed Toad down and gave him a little smile, cause naturally he would be glad to help protect his princess. So at this point I've just about finished the rough colors, so it's time to merge everything down and start painting. It's time to start refining the colors and add more details. I added some gradients, softened some of the edges, and defined the forms a little more. I'm also adding highlights and reflected light. When painting reflected light, I just like to drop the saturation a little bit. While doing this, I also realized that I preferred the look of it without the line art, so I guess I kinda just wasted my time. Oh well, it happens. I was just noodling away at the rendering when came back to tell me that overall, my colors were just too saturated, and there wasn't enough of a value difference between the lights and shadows. I did want my Peach to be very bright and colorful, but remember, when all of your colors are saturated, none of them are saturated. You want to use saturation more deliberately. She did a quick paint over, and I was blown away at how much prettier and more tasteful her take was. This is how you do it. First, you use curves to bring down the saturation and bring all the values closer together. Then, I put a linear burn layer on top and painted the shadows back in. Afterwards, I also put a few saturated colors on top, particularly where the core shadows were. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without just paint badly, I guess. I'm so much happier with this drawing after these fixes. And okay, we're almost done. It's time for the finishing touches. I put a texture layer on top to add some textural interest. You can just use a noise layer for this, but I prefer to use an actual scan of markers on paper. It looks more organic and natural. When I came to signing my name, I got so much help that I felt bad not including everyone else. But it kind of took up too much space, so I just signed it Peacat and the Power of Friendship. Thanks again so much to Joofoot and SteveSketches for helping me out with this. Because of them, the drawing came out so much better. So here's the final results. What do you think of Paladin Peach? Personally, I really like how it turned out. If you liked the video, consider designing a suit of armor for the subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching. Catch you next time. Bye-bye! So speak. Does this make sense? The new Princess Peach game, the new Princess Peach game, the new Princess Peach game just came out. But while I'm doing this, I noticed that the... But while I'm doing this, I noticed that the...